At 2:15 a.m. on March 17, 1945, Sergeant Frank Dietrich crouched in the shadows outside Stalag VII-A's administration block, gripping a combat knife with a blade no longer than his palm. 9 SS guards patrolled the perimeter between him and the intelligence cache that could save 4,000 Allied prisoners. In the next 90 seconds, that knife would drop every single guard without a gunshot, without a scream, and without a single vermacht soldier understanding what killed them until British pathologists examined the body 6 weeks later and discovered something that would rewrite close-quarters combat doctrine for the next 8 decades. The guards never heard him coming. They never had a chance to raise their weapons. And by dawn, the compound's entire security apparatus would be hunting a ghost who'd already disappeared into the forest with documents proving the location of 3 undiscovered extermination facilities. But Frank Dietrich hadn't learned to kill silently in any military training program. He'd learned it 14 years earlier in the basement of his uncle's butcher shop in Cleveland's Slavic village, where a 12-year-old boy had discovered that the fastest way to process livestock was to severe blood vessels in very specific ways, and that once you understood mammalian anatomy, the technique transferred to any warm-blooded creature that stood on 2 legs or 4. Frank Dietrich was born in 1914 to Polish immigrants who'd settled in Cleveland's industrial corridor, where steel mills turned the sky orange and the Cuyahoga River caught fire twice before he turned 16. His father worked the blast furnaces at Republic Steel. His mother took in laundry from the foremen's families. His uncle Max ran a butcher shop on East 65th Street that serviced the neighborhood's Polish, Czech, and Slovak communities. Families who wanted their kielbasa made the old way, who demanded blood sausage that tasted like home. Frank started working the shop at age 11, swept floors, carried ice, scrubbed the cutting tables until his hands cracked from the lye soap. By 12, Max had him in the back room teaching him the knife work that separated a butcher from a meat cutter. "You don't hack," Max said in Polish, demonstrating on a hanging beef carcass. "You find the seam, you follow the blood, you cut what needs cutting, nothing extra." The boy learned fast, found he had a feel for it, understanding where the arteries ran, how the muscle groups connected, which cuts blood fast and which blood slow. He could process a hog in 8 minutes, could break down a steer in under an hour, could feel the resistance change in his blade when he hit different tissue densities. "Good hands," Max said, "steady. Most men, they get squeamish. You don't?" Frank didn't. He found the work honest. You killed the animal clean. You used every part. You charged a fair price. There was a logic to it. A geometry of flesh and bone that made sense when nothing else in the world did. He was 17 when the shop was robbed. 3 men late at night after closing. Max in the office counting the week's receipts. Frank in the back scraping down the cutting tables. He heard Max's voice rise, heard the impact of something heavy against the office wall, moved without thinking, grabbed the bond knife from the sink where he'd been cleaning it. 6 in of flexible steel, thin enough to slide between ribs, sharp enough to split a hair. Found the first robber going through the register. The man turned, saw a skinny kid holding a knife, laughed. Frank drove the blade into the man's femoral artery with the same precise angle he'd use on a hanging carcass. Felt the resistance, knew he'd hit it clean, stepped back. The robber looked confused. Looked down at his leg, sat down hard, bled out in 90 seconds. The other 2 ran. The cops called it self-defense. Max called it necessity. Frank called it nothing at all. Just the application of knowledge he'd already possessed used on a target that happened to be human instead of livestock. He never talked about it. Went back to work the next morning. Processed 3 hogs and a beef, washed the blood off his hands, and went home for dinner. When the war came in 1941, He enlisted because the steel mills were closing and the butcher shop wasn't making enough to support 2 families. He was 27, too old for the infantry's preference, too working ass for officer training. They put him in intelligence OSS eventually because he spoke Polish and German from the neighborhood, because he could read maps, because he didn't panic under pressure. They trained him in espionage and infiltration, in codes and signals. They never asked if he knew how to kill quietly. They assumed he'd need to be taught. Frank said nothing, learned what they wanted to teach him, kept the other knowledge to himself. By 1943, he was running intelligence operations behind German lines. Sabotage, document retrieval, prisoner extraction. The work required silence more often than firepower. A gunshot brought patrols, but a body that didn't start screaming until you were already gone bought you hours of head start. The OSS issued him weapons. A Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, double-edged 7-in, designed by British commandos for silent killing. He used it twice, found it clumsy. The blade was too rigid, the grip wrong for the kind of precision work he understood. It was designed for stabbing. He didn't stab, he cut. He requisitioned a standard USMC KBA bar instead. 7-in blade, single edge, flexible enough to feel what you were cutting. Electrical tape until it fit his hand the way the Bond knife had fit in the shop. Used it the way Uncle Max had taught him. Femoral artery for the legs. Subclavian if you could reach it. Cuts that dropped a man in seconds. That alerted nearby sentries. June 1943 and March 1945 guards. Each time he used the same technique. Cuts designed to sever major. That might deflect the blade or make noise. For MAC patrols who couldn't understand. From wounds that didn't look severe, but catastrophic internal bleeding that killed in under 2 minutes. Allied operatives using advanced surgical techniques. They never considered that the technique came from a butcher shop in Cleveland. Anatomy on pigs and cattle before he'd ever. Frank read the reports through captured documents. Said nothing, kept working. The OSS wanted something more than corpses in the woods. A pea camp near Mooseburg that held 4,000 Allied prisoners contained documentation about 3 extermination facilities, locations, operational details, evidence. Too deep in German territory for an extraction team. Could access the administration building where the documents were stored. They needed someone who could kill 9 guards in. Frank's commander showed him the camp layout. 9 men between you and the objective, the commander said. You take one down, the others see it. Kept the edge sharp enough to shave with. Finding the seams in the human anatomy the same way he'd found them in beef cattle. Carotid for the neck. Cuts that bled fast and quiet, without the thrashing. He killed 14 German soldiers this way between centuries, officers caught alone in the wrong place. Precise angles, specific depths, vessels without hitting bone or cartilage. Each time the bodies were found hours later by how a man could bleed to death so quickly. Narrow incisions, minimal surface damage. German intelligence issued reports. Speculation about specialized medical training. Analysis of wound patterns. That the man killing their soldiers had learned applied it to humans. But by early 1945, they wanted intelligence from inside Stalag VII-A, and according to intercepted transmissions, the SS hadn't destroyed yet. The camp was too well guarded for a raid, but a single operative moving at night could penetrate the perimeter, could retrieve them and disappear before the garrison understood what had happened, under 2 minutes without alerting the compound. Aerial reconnaissance photos, guard rotation schedules, sentries positioned 30 yards apart, overlapping sight lines. Unless they don't, Frank said, you can't. Knife 9 men before they raise an alarm. I can if I do it right. The commander studied him. What's right look like fast cuts. Specific targets, they drop before they know they're hit. You've done this before 14 times. Not 9 at once, same principle. Larger scale. The commander approved the mission. Gave him 2 weeks to prepare. Frank spent the time studying human anatomy texts from the OSS medical library. Not to learn what he didn't already know, but to confirm that military physicians understood the same vascular geography he'd learned in the butcher shop. They did. The textbooks used different language, but the principles were identical. Sever the femoral artery and a man has 90 seconds of consciousness before blood pressure drops below functional threshold. Sever the carotid and you have 30 seconds. Hit the subclavian hidden beneath the clavicle and you have 45 seconds. But the victim usually doesn't realize he's been cut until he's already losing coordination. Frank made a list, memorized the guard positions, calculated the approach angles, timed himself with a stopwatch on a practice course using sandbags as targets, worked until he could move through 9 positions in 70 seconds. Cut, step, cut, step, cut. March 16, 1945, the OSS inserted him 6 miles north of Stalag VII-A. He moved through the forest after dark, carrying nothing but the caber knife, a suppressed well-rod pistol for emergencies, and a canvas satchel for the documents. He reached the perimeter at 1:45 a.m., settled into the tree-in, watched the guard rotation for 30 minutes, confirmed the patterns matched the reconnaissance reports. 9 guards, 3 on the western fence line, 2 at the administration building entrance, 4 patrolling the interior compound. Searchlights swept the perimeter every 40 seconds. Guard positions overlapped. If one fell, the others would see it within 10 seconds. Unless they all fell within the same 10 seconds. Frank waited until the searchlight passed. Moved. Climax begins. 30,000-word mark. The first guard stood 20 feet inside the fence line, rifle slung over his shoulder, smoking a cigarette. Frank approached from behind, angling right to avoid the man's peripheral vision. Closed the distance in 4 seconds. The guard turned his head at the last moment. Some animal instinct sensing movement. Too late. Frank's left hand clamped over the guard's mouth. The K-bar came up in his right hand. Blade angled 30 degrees from horizontal and drove into the subclavian artery beneath the man's clavicle. Felt the resistance change as steel parted tissue. Felt the warmth against his knuckles as pressure released. The guard's body went rigid. Frank held him upright for 3 seconds while the blood pressure dropped, then lowered him silently to the ground. The cigarette was still lit. He crushed it under his boot. 7 seconds elapsed. The second guard, 15 YDs east, hadn't noticed. Frank moved low, fast, using the shadows cast by the searchlight tower. The second guard was younger, nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Frank came from his right side this time. The man was left-handed, rifle positioned wrong for a quick response. The C-bar went into the femoral artery, severing it completely in a single draw cut that started at the inner thigh and pulled toward the hip. Massive hemorrhage. The guard opened his mouth to scream. Frank's hand was already there, crushing the windpipe before sound emerged. Felt the man's legs collapse, lowered him, moved. 14 seconds. The third guard on the fence line stood near a storage shed sheltered from the wind. Frank approached from the shed's far side, using the structure to mask his movement. This one required different geometry. The guard was facing partly toward him. Impossible to approach from behind without being seen. Frank picked up a stone, threw it 10 FT to the guard's left. The man's head snapped toward the sound. Muscle memory training. Exactly what Frank wanted. The moment the guard's eyes tracked the sound, Frank closed the distance. Dot came from the right. The C-bar entered below the ear, angled down and forward, severing the carotid artery and jugular vein simultaneously. Catastrophic blood loss. The guard's hands came up fumbling, already losing coordination. Frank caught him under the arms, guided him down. 22 seconds. The searchlight was sweeping back. Frank pressed flat against the storage shed, counting the seconds. The light passed. He moved toward the administration building. Two guards at the entrance 30 ft apart facing.